study. So I'd like us to continue from where we left yesterday. And so I'll do a quick recap. And then we move on, we try and see if we'll meet our objective. So yesterday, after yesterday's, like all we did yesterday, two of my friends approached me and told me that that was a tough exercise. It was hard for them to understand. So it's for the sake of two of my friends that I'm going like to recap. And then I can see like we increased. We have some who are not there yesterday. So the recap will also serve in the benefit. Alright. Okay. Right, thank you. So we have a silent prayer before we start. Amen. I'll do a quick recap, and then I'll make one correction, and then we'll move. So yesterday we wanted to study the book of Matthew chapter 24, though not in detail. We went there specifically because there is a point you want to pick that will be important for the study that I want us to do. So what we are establishing is more of giving me an opportunity to do the study that I desire all of us to understand. So as such, when we went to the book of Matthew chapter 24, we said the first thing we need to do is to establish the historical background of Matthew chapter 24. So to achieve this, we went to the book of John chapter 1. So in the book of John chapter 1, we went there, we asked ourselves what was the subject or theme in the book of John chapter 1. So we agreed what is the theme when we come to the book of John chapter 1.
We have seen
the word Christ. So the theme of John chapter 1 is the word. So when you read a few verses in John chapter 1, it will make the point that the word is Christ. And then John will start telling you a few things that happened to the word. So among the events that happened to the word Christ is verse 29 of the book of John chapter 1. So we said in relation to verse 29 of the book of John chapter 1,
lakkoofsa 29 wal qabate
what we see is the baptism of Christ.
wanti nuyi argine cuuphamuu Kiristoos.
So we said that then gives us the historical, gives us the year.
Yeroo inni itti cuuphame yookaan bara inni itti cuuphame nutti kan.
So we said, what is the year that Christ is baptized?
Yoomni cuuphame Kiristoos.
27 AD.
27.
But we went through other myriad of history that is not on the board.
Seenaawwan kan biroos ilaalee turre booddee irra kan hin jirre.
And established that Christ is not just baptized in 27 AD, but he is baptized in the atom of 27 AD.
Bara 27 qofa hin jenne bara 27 keessa birraa keessa kan inni cuuphame lafa keenya.
So do we all remember what we did that led us to this conclusion?
Hundumti keessan ni yaadattu akkamittiin birraa kanarraa akka geenye.
We all remember what we did?
Yaadattu.
Our anchor point was the book of Daniel chapter 9 verse 25 through 27.
Wanti nuyi irratti hundoofne Daani'el boqonnaa 9 lakkoofsa 24
So if you do a diligent study of the book of Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 through 27,
yoo Daani'el boqonnaa 9 lakkoofsa 24 jiru sirriitti qo'anne,
you'll see that Christ is baptized in the atom of 27 AD.
Kiristoos birraa bara 27 keessa kan inni cuuphame argina.
So we move to the book of John chapter 2
Achi Yohaannis boqonnaa 2tti deemne
verse 13,
lakkoofsa 13
and we saw that we had moved from the atom of 27 AD
birraa 27 irraa kaane
and we are in the spring of 28 AD.
gara arfaasaa bara 28.
So now do we remember why we said we've moved from 27 AD to 28 AD?
Akkamittiin 27 irraa gara 28tti akka deemne yaadattu?
Do we remember?
Yaadattu?
You'll give us some explanation to that?
Wanta nuti kan qabdu achi keessa.
Asubiri yookaan faasikaalii guyyaa arfaffaatti yeroo qofaadha. Kanaafiyyuu ispiriingii immoo gara xumuraarra ji'a jalqabaadha jechuudha. Ji'a jalqabaa guyyaa sanaati. Faasubiriin akka versii gosa biratti yaadatti sababa guyyaa qorfuuchee tokko faatee waggaan sun waggaa haaraa ta'e jechuudha.
He's saying that Passover takes place or is celebrated on the 14th day of the first month.
All right.
That means when we say it is first month, it is a new year.
It's a new year. So exactly. So our anchor point was when we come to verse 13 of John chapter 2.
Yohaannis boqonnaa 2
We are standing in the Jewish Passover.
ayyaana Faasikaa warra Yihuudootaa irra jirra jechuudha.
And the Jewish Passover used to happen on the 14th day of the first month.
Inni immoo guyyaa 14ffaa ji'a tokkoffaarra jira.
So we said in the previous chapter, if we are at the end of 27 AD,
boqonnaa duraa keessatti yookaan boqonnaa tokkoffaa keessatti yoo xumura bara 27ffaarra jirra ta'e.
So when we come to chapter 2, we find ourselves in the Passover. It must be the Passover of a new year.
Boqonnaan lammaffaan itti aanee dhufa waan ta'eef 14ffaa ji'a tokkoffaarratti yeroo jennu waggaa haaraa.
So we said that is 28 AD.
Kuni 28.
And we saw that at the start of Christ's ministry, he does his first temple cleansing in 28 AD.
Kiristoos tajaajila isaa yeroo jalqabu mana qulqullummaa qulqulleessuu isa jalqabaa hojjetee jechuudha bara 28 keessa.
So we moved 3 years that are given in John chapter 2 verse 21, 1921.
Yohaannis boqonnaa 2 lakkoofsa 19 ta'uu danda'a. Isaas ni kennee waggoota 3 deemne.
And we saw that that is leading us to the Passover of 31 AD.
Inni kun keessatti nu geesse ayyaana Faasikaa isa bara 31.
And this is the crucifixion of Christ.
Inni fannifamuu Kiristoos.
Because when Christ is crucified, he is crucified as the Passover lamb.
Kiristoos kan inni fannifame akka hoolaa Faasikaatti.
So that was on the 14th day of the first month as well.
Inni kunis guyyaa 14ffaa ji'a tokkoffaati.
So we saw in 31 AD, the spring of 31 AD,
Kanaaf arfaasaan bara 31
Christ is going to cleanse the temple the second time.
Kiristoos mana qulqullummaa yeroo lammaffaadhaaf qulqulleessa.
So those are the two temple cleansing.
Isaan kun qulqulleessuu mana qulqullummaa lamaani.
At the start of Christ's ministry, it cleanses the temple.
Kiristoos tajaajila isaa yeroo jalqabu mana qulqullummaa qulqulleesse.
At the end of Christ's ministry, he again cleanses the temple.
Kiristoos gaafa tajaajila isaa xumurus mana qulqullummaa qulqulleesse.
So we said the period between the autumn of 27 AD to the spring of 28 AD is 6 months.
Barri birraa 27 barraa kaasee amma albaasaa 27tti ji'a ja'atu jira.
So if you add 6 months and the 3 years,
ji'a ja'an kana waggaa 8tti gaafa daanu,
it will give you 3.5 years. That is the midst of the week, spoken in Daniel chapter 9.
waggaa 3 walakkaa nu kenna, inni immoo walakkaa torbanichaa kan jedhu Daani'el boqonnaa 9 keessatti kan nu kenname.
So basically what we have here is Christ's ministry. Christ did his ministry for 3.5 years.
Asirratti wanti nu arginu gaa tajaajila Kiristoos kan inni tajaajile waggaa 3 walakkaadha.
So now we came to this second temple cleansing at the end of Christ's ministry.
Yeroo xumura tajaajila Kiristoositti mana qulqullummaa qulqulleessuu isaa lammaffaa kan argina.
So that led us to the book of Matthew chapter 23 verse 38.
Inni immoo gara Maatiyyoos boqonnaa 23 lakkoofsa 38tti nu qajeelcha.
So when Christ has cleansed the temple the second time,
Kiristoos yeroo mana qulqullummaa yeroo lammaffaa qulqulleesse,
in verse 38 he tells the Pharisees and scribes,
lakkoofsa 38 keessatti Fariisonnii fi beektonni caafaa,
behold, your house is left unto you desolate.
isaaniin jedhee manni keessan kunoo onaa ta'e isiniif hafa.
After he has told them that their house has been left unto them desolate,
Mannis keessan onaa ta'e isiniif hafa erga jedhe booda,
now when we come to Matthew chapter 24 verse 1,
gara Maatiyyoos boqonnaa 24 lakkoofsa 1tti gaafa
we see Christ departing the temple.
Kiristoos mana qulqullummaa keessaa utuu ba'uu argina.
So we said for Christ to depart the temple in verse 24 verse 1,
Kiristoos mana qulqullummaa keessaa ba'uu gaafa arginu 24 tokkorratti,
we must look for a point or a verse
duraan dursee lakkoofsi jira jechuudha.
that gives us when Christ entered the temple.
Kan Kiristoos mana qulqullummaatti seenuu nutti agarsiisu.
So we said, when did Christ enter the temple?
Kanaaf maal jenne Kiristoos yoome mana qulqullummaa seene jenne? Yoom
When
seene
did
jenne?
Christ enter the temple?
Boqonnaa meeqatu jira?
No, no,
Matthew 21.
Namoonni waamitti namoonni waamitti.
I'm speaking to her. Yeah, yes.
Didami? Matthew 21.
So Matthew 21 chapter 12.
Maatiyyoos boqonnaa 21 lakkoofsa 12.
So Christ will enter the temple in Matthew chapter 21 verse 12.
Kiristoos mana qulqullummaa kan seene Maatiyyoos boqonnaa 21 lakkoofsa 12 irratti.
He will preach in chapter 22.
Boqonnaa 22 keessatti yeroo
He is
arginu lallabaa jira.
still preaching in chapter 23.
Boqonnaa 23 keessattis lallabaa jiraachuu isaa argina.
In chapter 24, he will depart the temple.
Boqonnaa 24 keessatti mana qulqullummaa.
And that is the last time ever Christ never returned to the temple until when he is crucified.
Kiristoos mana qulqullummaatti hin deebine lammaffaa amma fannifamutti.
So when Christ tells them that their temple, their house is left unto them desolate in verse 38.
Lakkoofsa 38 keessatti Kiristoos manni keessan onaa ta'ee isiniif hafa yeroo jedhu.
Now in verse 24 verse 1, the disciples will call Christ and they'll show him the architect of the temple.
Maatiyyoos 24 lakkoofsa 1 irratti bartoonni dhufanii kunoo mana qulqullummaa.
So we said, why are they doing this? Why are the disciples showing Christ the temple?
Maaliif bartoonni kan isaan Kiristoositti mana qulqullummaa sana
You remember? She was there. You remember?
Maaliif?
You remember why? So why are they showing Christ the temple?
Humariyoski.
Huh? Yes.
Bartoonni maaliif mana qulqullummaa sana Kiristoositti argisiisan? They took long years to build it, and they thought that it will remain undemolished.
So that is correct. When they look at the architecture of the Jewish temple,
Yeroo ijaarsa ogummaa ittiin ijaarame ilaalan mana qulqullummaa sana
they don't believe it can be destroyed.
mindiigama jedhanii amanuu hin
So
dandeenye.
that is why they will take Christ and tell him, look at the architecture of this temple. Is this the temple you are saying it will be destroyed?
Ilaali mana qulqullummaa kana kan itti ijaarame isa kana kanatti hin diigama jettee.
So Christ will reaffirm that in verse 2.
Kiristoos irra deebi'ee hin diigama isaanii mirkaneessa
He will
lakkoofsa.
tell them, verily there will not remain remain any stone that will not be turned, thrown down.
Kanaaf dhagaan dhagaarratti hin jiru hin diigamin jedhetti hime.
So we said verse 38 of chapter 23
lakkoofsi 38 boqonnaa 23
is the same as verse 2 of chapter 24.
boqonnaa 24 lakkoofsa 2 wajjiniin tokkumadha.
And the relation between them is a repeat and enlarge.
Walitti dhufeenyi lakkoofsawwan kana lamaanii irra deebi'anii bal'isuudha.
So now, Frau, if you go to verse 38,
yoo gara lakkoofsa 38 deemtanii,
what is the message of Christ in one word?
maalidha ergaan Kiristoos jecha tokko.
So the house has been left unto you desolate.
Manni keessan onaa ta'e isiniif hafe yookaan onaa isa jedhudha jecha.
So now if you come to Matthew chapter 24 verse 2, Frau,
Maatiyos boqonnaa 24 gara lakkoofsa.
what is the message of Christ in one word? In one word.
Ergaan Kiristoos jecha tokkoon maalidha? Diigamuun.
In one word.
Destruction of
You are also called Frau, right?
Destruction.
So it's the destruction of the temple.
Diigamuu mana qulqullummaati.
So therefore we said,
Kanaaf maal jenne
your house has been left unto you desolate
manni keessan onaa ta'ee hafan inni jedheef
is the same as your temple has been destroyed.
manni qulqullummaa keessan hin diigamu jechuun isaa tokkumadha.
So left unto you desolate means it has been destroyed.
Onaa ta'ee hafa jechuu fi diigama jechuun tokkumadha.
But we know we already located this in 31 AD.
Kana egaa bara 31 irratti akka ta'e argisiisa.
So we know it's not true that the Jewish temple was destroyed in 31 AD.
Garuu immoo manni qulqullummaa warra Yihuudootaa 31 keessatti hin diigamne.
So from B, when is the temple destroyed?
Yoo bira kan inni diigame.
When is the Jewish temple destroyed?
Manni qulqullummaa Yihuudootaa
70 AD.
bara 70.
So now we know the temple is not destroyed in 31 AD.
Beekna manni qulqullummaa akka inni bara 31 keessatti hin diigamne.
It's only destroyed in 70 AD.
Inni bara 70 keessatti diigame.
So we said, what does Christ mean when he says in 31 AD, your temple has been destroyed?
Maal jechuudha ree bara 31 keessatti manni keessan onaa ta'e isiniif hafa yookaan hin diigama kan inni jedhe maal jechuusaati Kiristoos.
Mtuuma?
Bara 31.
Is explaining, is translating, will excuse him. So Frau, what does Christ mean?
Maal jechuusaati ree gana bara 70tti diigamoo bara 31 keessatti.
When he says in 31 AD, your temple has been destroyed.
Manni diigameera jechuunsa maal jechuudha.
The sacrifice that is done by high priest actually stopped during the Passover at the death of Christ on the cross as 31 AD.
From what are you saying?
He's saying the sacrificial lamb was for the last time, I think it was done in 31 AD.
So what does that have to do with the temple?
Christ was sacrificed in 31 AD, and that's
Yeah, and the sacrifice that is the literally
It was
by
it did not have
slaughtering the lamb, the total stop there, and the Saduceans and the Pharisees follow the Old Testament, previous sacrifices.
All right.
So the transition that Christian did not recognize among the Jews. They follow the previous things, sacrifice, any ordinances. So that is why Christ say your house left desolate.
Your house has been destroyed.
Yeah. So any other the religious thing is that is them previous most of the main life.
That is okay, Frau, but we know the temple is not destroyed here.
Yeah. It is literally not destroyed.
It's literally destroyed here.
Yeah.
So when he says he destroyed here, what is the implication?
The spiritual teaching is and the like.
All right, okay, that is fair. So, you remember what we said? Uh-huh. So what does Christ mean?
Maal jechuudha soddomii tokko keessatti manni keessan diigameera jechuun isaa maal jechuudha hin diigamne torbaatama keessatti diigamee garuu soddomii tokko keessatti diigameera jedhee yookaan onaa ta'e jedhee maal jechuudha.
Waan isaan hojjetan irraan 31 irraa kaasee ilaale 70 irratti isa ta'u 31 irratti dhaabbatee
Okay, so it's sanatti. She's saying he predicted or told what is happening in 78.
So, Frau Ada, so this was a sign. So this was a sign of the destruction that is going to come here. You remember we said that? So we also call this an harbinger. All herald. All honest. So this is like a down payment of what is going to happen in 70 AD. Now, if you come to John chapter 1, when Christ is going to tell them, destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days, what do the disciples ask from Christ? Give us the sign. So the sign is what they are asking here. And when the temple is destroyed, that is a down payment of what is going to happen to the temple in 70 AD. So now when we come to verse 3, because Christ has told them the temple is going to be destroyed, now the disciples are going to ask some questions. And they are going to ask one question in relation to the destruction of the temple. 2 questions in relation to the end of the world. Do you see that in verse 3, Frau? Of Matthew chapter 24. You can see that?
Yeah, he was not here.
It's okay, we'll wait until he gets there. You are there, Frau? Matthew chapter 24, verse 10.
When it will happen?
So how many questions can you see? How many questions?
When it will happen?
When these things shall be is the first question. The next question?
The signs of your coming.
What shall be the sign of their coming? The third question?
The signs of the end of times.
What shall be the sign of the end of the world?
Yeah.
So you see, one question is in relation to the destruction of the temple. The first one, when shall these things be? These things is what Christ has said in verse 2. You see that?
Yeah.
So they are asking one question in relation to the destruction of the temple, and then they add other 2 questions in relation to the end of the world. Can you see that?
Yeah.
But from what we have discussed, has Christ touched anywhere about the end of the world?
Let me translate for others too.
Okay.
There may be
Yeah, sure.
other people who are not been yesterday.
All right. I'm sorry. I only know from so I'm sorry.
Maybe one person to the Samuel.
Who else was not there?
Samuel was not here yesterday.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Who is Samuel?
Another person. Samuel is very sweet.
For him? All right, okay. I'll focus on
there are
you.
others too.
All right, no.
Kanaaf gaaffii tokko diigamuu mana qulqullummaa wajjiniin wal qabsiisanii gaafatanii bartoonni lakkoofsa 3 irratti Gaaffii lama immoo xumura addunyaatti wal qabsiisanii gaafatan. Gaaffii inni kun yoom isaan kun yoom ta'u jedhan. Isaan kun yoom ta'u jechuun isaanii waan inni Kiristoos dubbatu kun yoom ta'u waa'ee diigamuu maalaati. Gaaffiin warri kun lamaan milikkita dhufaatii keetiidhaan tokko milikkita yookaan mallattoo dhuma barichaa kana gaafatan jechuudha.
So you've translated that?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many questions can you see in Matthew chapter 24 verse 3?
Kanaaf gaaffii meeqa argitan Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24
Three questions. So we are all in agreement that we have three questions in 24 verse 3.
Hundumti keenya kana irratti walii gallee jechuudha. Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24 irratti gaaffii.
So from verse 2 and verse 38, what is Christ's message?
Lakkoofsa 38 jechuun Maatiyoos boqonnaa.
Okay, this to him, next to his husband.
Okay. The new house.
Yeah. No? Yes. No. He's looking behind him. Dr. Kedida, him. Otton is called Tolesa as well. All right. So this is Tolesa.
What is the question?
So the question is, what is the message of Christ in verse 38 of chapter 23 and verse 2 of Matthew chapter 24?
Ergaan Maatiyoos boqonnaa 23 lakkoofsa 38 irra jiruu fi Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24 lakkoofsa 2 irra jiru maal ture? Wanti lama diigamaa isa jedhamni walitti qabaasaa gaafa walitti qabnu lamaan isaayyuu waa'ee it's about destruction of the temple.
Okay, I agree with that. It's about the destruction of the temple. So why do you think in verse 3, why are then disciples in response to that, why are they asking a question in relation to the destruction of the temple and in relation to the end of the world? Why are they asking? Why are they sneaking in a question about the end of the world?
Okay, maaliif kita gaafatan lakkoofsa sadaffaarratti milikkita diigamuu qulqullummaa fi milikkita dhuma barichaa akkasumas dhufaatii Kiristoos maaliif gaafatanii? Maal irratti hundaa'anii gaafatanii jechuudha?
Kan isaan irratti hundaa'anii gaafatanii manni qulqullummaa hin diigama gaafa jedhu isaan immoo waan godhanii gaafatan. Manni qulqullummaa yoo diigame Gooftaa Yesuusin dhufaatii Kiristoos lammaffaa eegaa jiru waan ta'eef dhufaatiin Kiristoos lammaffaa gaafa dhufu immoo waan hundumtuu ni bada waan ta'eef jechuudha.
Yeah. He answered, he said, when the temple is destroyed, they know that Christ will come, and Christ is coming means the end of the world.
So all those who are not there, did we hear that?
He was here yesterday.
Okay, he was there.
Yeah.
So do those who are there, have you heard that concept?
So
So the disciples knows that when the temple will be destroyed, that is the second coming of the Son of Man. And when the second coming happens, that is the end of the world. So do we see the thinking of the disciples? So I want us to move quicker. So we went and compared and contrasted Matthew chapter 24 verse 3 with other two gospels.
Compare and contrast Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24 Maarqoosii fi Luqaasii wajjin.
So we saw the equivalent is Mark chapter 3 to 4, but the questions are in verse 4.
Isa kana wajjin wanta tokko kan qabu Maarqoos boqonnaa 13 lakkoofsa 3 fi 4 garuu gaaffiiwwan lakkoofsa 4 irra jiru.
So we'll find two questions in Mark.
Maarqoos keessa gaaffii lama argina.
When shall these things be?
Isaan kun yoom ta'u kan jedhuu fi
what shall be the sign when these things shall be fulfilled?
Isaan kun yeroo ta'an immoo milikkiti isaanii maali kan jedhu.
So when we come to Luke chapter 21 verse 7,
Yeroo Luqaas boqonnaa 21 lakkoofsa 7tti dhufnu
we also saw two questions.
gaaffii lama qabnachis.
When shall these things be?
Isaan kun yoom ta'u kan jedhuufi
What sign shall be there when the things shall come to pass?
isaan kun yeroo raawwatan immoo mallattoon maalidha kan jedhu.
So the first question 3a
Gaaffiin inni tokkoffaa 3 jiru
is available in Mark in 4a.
Marqos boqonnaa 13 lakkoofsa 4 jira.
It's available in Luke in 7a.
Luqaas 21 7 jira.
But when we come to 4b,
4 baatti gaafa dhufnu
it was not available in the book of Matthew,
Maatiyos keessa inni kun hin jiru
but it's available in Luke.
garuu Luqaas keessa jira.
So we said when we come to Mark and Luke,
Yeroo Marqosiif Luqaasin ilaallu
both the questions are addressing the destruction of the temple.
gaaffiin isaanii waa'ee diigamuu mana qulqullummaa hojii
So by comparing and contrasting,
compare and contrast fayyadamu
we brought the second question to Matthew.
gaaffii isa lammaffaa baarra jiru kana gara Maatiyositti fedhe.
So therefore, Matthew chapter 24 verse 3,
Kanaaf Maatiyos 24 lakkoofsa 3
we end up with 4 questions.
gaaffii 4 qabaatee jechuudha.
2 questions in relation to the destruction of the temple,
Gaaffiin lamaan diigamuu mana qulqullummaa hojii wal qabate.
2 questions in relation to the end of the world.
Gaaffiin lamaan immoo xumura addunyaa hojii wal qabate.
So I'll take this space and summarize the questions so that we can see them clearly.
Kanaaf walitti qabata sirriitti ilaaltanii fi hubattaniif.
And I think from this, my two friends who find this difficult will now understand. So the first question is when shall these things be? So 1a, sorry, 3a, we are using the verse. 3a will be the same as 4a. When shall these things be? It will be the same as 7a. What shall these things be? So those three are the same questions. We find them in all the 3 Gospels. So when we come to the second question, what shall be the sign when these things shall be fulfilled? That is 4b. Is the same as 7b. What sign shall be there when these things shall come to pass? So that makes up the second question. The third question, we'll find it in 3c. What shall be the sign of thy coming? And then the last question, we'll find it in 3d. What shall be the sign of the end of the world? So we end up with 4 questions in Matthew chapter 24 verse 3. For all of you seen that? So how many questions in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 24? 4 questions. 2 questions in relation to the destruction of the temple. 2 questions in relation to the end of the world. Now, we move quick. When we come to verse 4, we said now Christ will start answering the disciples. And he will start answering them in the chronology in which they asked the questions. So now this one to draw a better structure. So from the questions themselves, we can already come with the structure before we go to the prophecy itself. Because what we'll be having the end of the world, and then we'll be having the history of Christ, all the history of the disciples. So we said question 3a, 4a, and 7a 4b and 7b will be speaking to the destruction of the temple. But question 3c and 3d, they will be speaking to the end of the world. So these are questions in relation to the destruction of the temple. 3c and 3d, they speak to the end of the world. So in answering these questions, Christ is now going to answer them in the chronology in which they have been asked. So we said the starting of the answering will be verse 4. And they will answer these questions to verse 20. So from 3a, 4a, 7a, 4b, 7b, he'll answer them between verse 4 to verse 20. And then when we come to verse 21, we saw a great tribulation is introduced. So we said that is the 1260. Which starts from 538 to 1798. And we said that is between verse 21 right to around verse 26. So this is why I want to make a correction. So we said, when you come to verse 27, it's answering to the end of the world. And then when we come to verse 29, it's a repeated and last, so it's still speaking to the end of the world. But I'm saying the methodology we are using here is progression. So in that sense, I'll go with verse 29. I'll go with verse 29 to verse 31 to speak about the end of the world. And the assumption I'll make is that verse 21 to verse 28 are speaking to this history. And when we come to verse 29, we had already begun doing this yesterday. It was taking us to a history immediately after the Great Tribulation. Which is 1798. Which is this verse technically. So what now I want us to do, I want us to, for a moment, to focus. We had already begun to do that yesterday, but I want us now to go to the details. I want us to focus on this history, which is the history of the end of the world. So now I want us to go to verse 29 of Matthew chapter 24. So I believe that has been a fair summary. That has been a fair recap. People have understood what we are doing. So Dr. Kido, can we turn the board? I use the other side because I need this to work still. Alright, you are done writing the other side. Eh? Okay, now I want us to go to verse 29. I want us to focus on that history that comes at the end. So verse Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. Just a minute.
Yesus dabalee rakkina guyyoota sanaa booddee achumaan biiftuun hin dukkanoofti jiinis ifa ishee hin laattu urjoonni waaqaas hin harca'u humnoonni bantii waaqaas hin raafamu.
So immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give a light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be taken. Verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
Yommus milikinni ilma namaa waaqa keessatti mul'ata yeroo sanatti sabni biyya lafaa hundinuu boo'uuf jiru ilmi namaa immoo duumessoota waaqaa irraa humnaaf ulfina guddaadhaan dhufuusaa ni arguuf.
Verse that one, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Inni ergamoota isaa waaqarraa sagalee malakata guddaa wajjin in ergaa isaan immoo warra waaqayyoof waaman qixa arfanii handaara bantii waaqaa gar tokko amma gara sakaaniittis walitti hin qabu.
So now what I want us to do, I want us to take Matthew chapter 24.
Wanti akka goonu barbaadu Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24
verse 29,
lakkoofsa 29
and then I want us to find the equivalent in the other gospels.
wangeelota warra kan biraa keessaa kan kana wajjiniin tokko ta'ee akka barbaadnu barbaadu.
The same way we did with verse 3.
Akkuma lakkoofsa 3 irratti hojjenne jechuudha.
So I know the equivalent we said will be Mark 13.
Maarqos boqonnaa 13.
Okay, let me just give it some space. The equivalent will be Mark 13.
Maarqos 13.
And then what was the other equivalent? Luke
21.
The other equivalent will be Luke 21. And then I want to add more, one other that I will explain why I'll add it. So in this sense I'll add Revelation chapter 6. So I just want to go to these verses and then we'll try and compare and contrast them. So I want you to give me the verse that gives us the equivalent of Matthew chapter 29 in Mark 13.
Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24 lakkoofsa 29 wajjiniin tokko kan ta'e Maarqos boqonnaa 13 keessa nama barbaadu jechuudha.
They have understood the question?
Yeah.
The same way they gave me an equivalent when we are in the book of Matthew chapter 24 verse 3.
Akkuma kaleessaa jechuudha.
Alright, so I'll give you more clues. It's okay. When we come to 29, I've done the hard job of identifying chapter 29. So I'm going to divide it into 29a. And that will give us the first part of the signs. Because the first part says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give a light, and the stars shall fall from heaven.
Guyyootuma sana booda guyyoota guddaa mee booda jechaadha aduun dukkanofti ijjiin si fashee laattu urjoonni waaqaas hin harca'u kan jedhu.
So I'll take the first part of 29a is the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Maal argina gaa kutaa tokkoffaa keessatti aduu ji'aa fi urjoota.
So I'm just using that as symbols.
Isaan sana akka
So S for sun, M for moon, S for stars.
Saa maafi saa fayyadamaa jechuudha. Aduu ji'aa fi urjoota jechuudha.
And then I'll give 29b.
Ajimmoo demi sagal baarratti.
That will be the second part of that verse.
Inni kutaa lammaffaa isaati.
That says the power of the heavens shall be shaken.
Humnoonni waaqaa hin hollatu kan jedhu.
So I'll use PH, meaning power of heaven shall be shaken.
Humna waaqaa isa dhufi haa fayyadamaa.
Then I'll divide it to 30a.
Soddomas iddoo ni.
What is the first part of verse 30 speaking about?
lakkoofsa 30ffaan kutaan tokkoffaan isaa waa'ee maalii
And
dubbata?
then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven.
Milikkiti ilma namaas samii keessatti hin mul'ataa jedha.
So that will be dealing with the sign
Inni milikkita
of the Son of Man.
ilma namaati.
Right? And then I'll give 30b.
Baarratti
What is the last part of 30 dealing with? And there shall be all tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of. So that is the second coming.
Faatii lammaffaadha jechuudha.
So I'll call it the second advent.
Faatii lammaffaa.
Right? So that is how I'll break down verse 29 through 30. So that is Matthew chapter 24, 29 through 30. That is the breakdown.
Naatota boqonnaan 24 lakkoofsa 29 akkasitti adda caccabsinee ilaalla.
So let's go to the book of Mark.
Gara Maarqosiin dhaqna.
Mark, and in this case it will be Mark chapter 13. You only need to give me the verse. I've done the hard work of giving you the chapter.
Boqonnaa isaa sanitti beera lakkoofsa sanitti verse 24 and 25.
Okay, so if we go to Mark, the equivalent is?
24 to 26.
Okay, all right. Let me just get there. Mark, Luke. Okay. Chapter 20, verse 24, right?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's go to Luke and look its equivalent, and then we'll equate them. So Mark, I agree with the verse 24. That one makes verse 24 too. What is the last verse? 26. Okay, I think that is correct. All right. So as someone else looks at Luke,
Namni kan biraan Luqaasiin
let's focus on Mark chapter 13, verse 24.
Maarqos boqonnaa 13 lakkoofsa.
It says, "But in those days after the great tribulation."
Guyyoota sanatti rakkina kana booddee.
So we are aware, or rather we did this, we already proved that those days,
Guyyoota sana kan jedhu
they are the same as the great tribulation.
yeroo gidiraa sana jechuudha.
Do you remember that?
Yaadattu
So we proved that the great tribulation is 1260.
yeroo gidiraa suni.
So therefore we said that those days will also be the 1260.
Kanaaf guyyoota sana kan jedhu 1260.
So if you come to verse 29 of Matthew chapter 24,
Gara Maatiyoo 24-29
it will tell you immediately after the great tribulation.
yeroo gidiraa sun darbee battalumatti jedha.
So if you come to Mark, it will use both those days and that tribulation.
Guyyootuma sanatti jedhana Maarqos immoo.
And then when you come to Mark,
Yeroo gara Maarqosiin dhuftan
it will tell you the sun shall be darkened,
aduun hin dukkanoofti.
the sun shall not give her light, not the moon. So it will give you the sun
Aduun
and the moon.
akkasumas ji'a.
So it will not give you the stars. Do we see that?
Guyyoota kan jedhu
While Matthew gives us the sun, the moon, and the stars, Mark will only give us the sun and the moon.
lakkoofsa 24 irratti ji'aa fi aduu duwwaatu jira malee urjiin hin jiru.
Okay, so if you come to verse 25,
Gara lakkoofsa 25 yoo dhuftan
now it will give us the stars of heaven shall fall and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken.
urjoonni waaqaa siin harca'u humnoonni waaqaa siin hollatu kan jedhu argina.
So it will give us the stars
Ji'a
and then the powers of heaven are shaken.
humnoota samii kan jedhu.
You see what? Okay, Matthew gives us the stars, the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Aduu ji'aa fi urjoota dhamatoosiin
And then it will just give us the powers of heavens are shaken.
humnoonni waaqaa immoo nollatuudha jira.
So you come to Mark, it will only give us the sun and the moon,
Maarqos aduu fi ji'a duwwaa
and then it will take the stars and combine it with the powers of heaven shaken.
humnoonni waaqaa nollatu kan jedhu isa urjii alca urjii walitti
We are following up to that point.
masaatti hordofaa jirra.
So now, I want us, the next verse was verse 26. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with a great power and glory. So what is that event in verse 26?
Lakkoofsa 26 kan jiru maali taatee maaliiti?
Second coming.
Second coming.
Taatee dhufaatii lammaffaati.
So then the sign of the Son of coming of Man will not be there in Mark.
Maarqos keessa hin jiru waa'een milikkita
It will skip that and then it will give us the second advent.
dhufaatii lammaffaa nutti maasaa sana dhiise.
So let me give the verse that was 26. I believe.
26.
That is 26. Then this 25. This 24. Okay. All right. So Luke 21.
Lukaas 21 deemna.
Let me just move this closer. So what is the equivalent in Luke 21?
Lukaas 21 yeroo laata lakkoofsota warra kana eessatti argitu?
Redemption.
25. 25
20?
25 to 27.
All right. So we go to Luke 21. Dr. Kidida, which verse are they saying?
25 to 27.
25 to 27.
Yeah.
All right. So, and there shall be say, okay, that is correct as well.
So see that?
So you guys are becoming wonderful students.
Barattoota baay'ee gaarii ta'atu.
So now, if you go to verse 25 of Luke 21,
Yoo Lukaas 21 dubbistani.
it says, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars."
Milikinnis biiftuutti ji'atti urjootatti hin ta'a.
So that is verse 25. Sorry. 25, it gives the sun, the moon, and the stars. So this is the same structure we have in Matthew 24.
Maatiyoos 24 irra isa jiru wajjiniin caasaan isaa tokkodha.
So it's a different structure in Mark, but it's the same structure in Luke 21.
Maarqos irra inni jiru xinnoo addadha isaan irra.
Alright, okay. So when you go to, it's and in the stars upon the earth, the distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring.
Lafarratti sabni hundinuu in muddama buusaadhaa fi dhahaa galaanaa.
So Luke will add new information.
Lukaas odeeffannoo dabalataa kenna.
So what is that new information that Luke adds that we don't have in Matthew and then we don't have in Mark?
Maatiyoosii fi Maarqos kan nutti himin odeeffannoo dabalataa Lukaas nu kenne maalidha?
Distress of nations.
Muddama yookaan dhiphina namootaa.
So Luke gives an extra information, and that is distress of nations.
Saba lafarraa hin muddamu kan jedhu.
So that is neither in Matthew and it's not there in Mark.
Maatiyoosii fi Maarqos keessa hin jiru.
All right. So the next verse is verse 26.
Lakkoofsa 26
So men's heart failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken.
Namoonni naasuudhaaf isa biyya lafaatti dhufu sodaatanii eeggachuuf irraa kan ka'e hin laafu humnoonni bantii waaqaa keessaa.
So that is 26 and 26 it given about men's heart failing. Then it gives us this. The powers of heaven are shaken.
Namoonni hin sodaatu kan jedhuu fi humnoonni waaqaa hin hollatu kan jedhu nutti hima.
Right? And then verse, we said it ends in verse 27.
26 and it ends on 27.
All right. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So which event is that?
Achi booddee ilmi namaa humnaa fi ulfina guddaadhaan samiirra mul'ata kan jedhu taatee maalidha?
So verse 27 is the second advent.
Lakkoofsi 27 dhufaatii lammaffaa.
We all see that.
Argaa jiranii.
So the second advent is consistent in Matthew, Mark and Luke.
Dhufaatiin lammaffaan Maatiyus, Maarqos, Luqaas keessatti haaluma tokkoon dhiyaata.
So when we come to the sign of man, the coming of the sign that the Son of Man is coming,
Waa'ee miliikita dhufaatii ilma namaa.
It's not there in Mark,
Maarqos keessa hin jiru.
and then it's not there in Luke.
Luqaas keessas hin jiru.
So when we come to the power of heaven being shaken,
Humnoonni Waaqaa hin mul'atu kan raafamu kan jedhu.
it's available in Matthew.
Maatiyus keessa jira.
Mark has the stars. When we have the stars, it combines them with the shaking of the powers of heaven.
Maarqos raafamuu humna humnoota Waaqaa fi urjoota walitti deebi'a.
So we also have that in Luke.
Luqaas keessas jira.
So when we come to the sun, the moon, and the stars,
Aduu ji'aaf urjoota gaafa ilaallu.
Mark eliminates the stars. He just puts the sun and the moon.
Maarqos urjoota keessaa hambisa.
But when we come to Luke, it has the sun, the moon, and the stars, but it adds some new information.
Luqaas hunduma baay'ee qaba odeeffannoo dabalataa kenna.
Which is the distress of nations. Which is the distress of nations.
Dhiphina uummataa yookaan sabaa kan jedhudha.
So I want us to go to Revelation chapter 6
Mul'ata boqonnaa ja'arra deemna.
and add that side, and then we'll begin to dissect it.
Achi isatti daballee gargar caccabsine ilaalu.
So in going to Revelation chapter 6,
Gara mul'ata boqonnaa ja'a gaafa deemnu.
I'm just using the proof text of what we have been given already.
Tooftaa proof text fayyadamna.
So Revelation chapter 6,
Mul'ata boqonnaa ja'a.
who can give us the equivalent of those verses in Revelation chapter 6?
Lakkoofsa wal fakkaatu warra kanaatti wal fakkaatu eenyutu nutti hima? Boqonnaa ja'a keessa. Verse 12.
So it starts in verse 12.
Lama irratti jalqaba.
Where does it end? It starts in verse 12. Where does it end?
Irratti dhaabbata.
Sorry? Verse 12 is correct, by the way.
Someone said in this one, verse 13.
Ends in verse 13. So this is Revelation chapter 6, and we are going to go to verse 12. So what does verse 12 have? If you go to Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 says, "And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood."
Kana booddee walitti mallattoo isa jalaffaa banuusaa nan arge socho'a lafaa guddaa tokkotu ta'e biiftuunis akka cinaatti eelee hin taate ji'i guutummaatti akka dhiigaa diimate.
So it gives us the earthquake,
Socho'a lafaa,
it gives us the sun,
aduu,
it gives us the moon.
akkasumas ji'a.
So what doesn't it give us according to this verse and this verse?
Akka Maatiyoosiif Luqaas keessatti maalidha kan inni
It takes away the stars. We see that.
urjoota keessaa hambise.
But it adds a new information, that is the earthquake.
Odeeffannoo dabalataa kenna. Innis maalidha? Raafamuu lafaa.
So when we come to verse 13,
Gara lakkoofsa 13 gaafa deemnu.
"And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth,
Okay.
even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind."
Akka ija arbuu qilleensi jabaan raasee harcaasuutti urjoonni waaqa keessaa lafatti gadi harcaalu.
So we have the stars,
Asirratti immoo urjoota argina.
and then we have the shaking.
Raafamus argina.
Right? Verse 13. So I'm saying I'm not going to add it, but Revelation chapter 6
Mul'ata boqonnaa ja'a.
is going to give us the same information as Revelation chapter 16 verse 20.
Akka odeeffannoo mul'ata boqonnaa 16 lakkoofsatti dabalee jiru wajjin odeeffannoo wal fakkaataa nuti.
So now if you go to Revelation chapter 16 verse 20,
Mul'ata boqonnaa 16 lakkoofsatti dabalee yoo ilaaltan. biyyi bishaan keessaa hundinuu baqatee hin sokkee tulluunis hin argamne.
But just a minute, I don't believe it's verse 20. Right? It seems I'm forgetting the verse. Okay, I'll get it in the next study.
Qo'annaa keenya sassaabu keessatti
I think it's right. I can't see the verse. So just hold on. I'll give it when we come the next time.
qo'annaa sassaabu.
I know it's Revelation chapter 16, but I'm not able to peruse quickly which specific verse are we speaking about. Anyway, so let's now summarize what we've done.
Wanna amma yoonatti dubbanne walitti qabna.
So we went to the book of Matthew chapter 24.
Magaalaa Maatiyoos boqonnaa 24 deemne.
And we've seen that the book of Matthew chapter 24, the disciples are asking two questions in relation to the temple, two questions in relation to the end of the world.
Bartoonni gaaffii lama beekamoota qulqullummaatti wal qabsiisanii gaaffii lama immoo xumuraatti nyaachuu wal qabsiisan.
So in verse 4, Christ will start responding to the disciples.
Lakkoofsa afuraffaarratti immoo deebii isaanii deebisee argama.
And he will first answer the question in relation to the temple.
Jalqaba mana qulqullummaatti wal qabsiisee deebiseefi.
And then he will answer the question in relation to the end of the world.
Achi booda immoo xumuraatti nyaachuu wal qabsiisee.
So we divided this history into three. You remember that structure?
Seenaa kana iddoo sadiitti irra yaadattume.
So we've divided it into three.
Iddoo sadiitti irra seenaa kana.
We have the end of the world.
Xumura addunyaa kan jedhu qabna.
And then we have the history of the disciples.
Seenaa barattootaa kan jedhu.
So this is the history of the destruction of the temple.
Badiisa yookaan diigamuu mana qulqullummaati.
We have the 1260, the Great Tribulation.
Bara 1260 yeroo gidiraati.
And then we have the end of the world.
Akkasumas xumura addunyaa.
So this is how Christ answers the disciples' questions.
Kiristoos akkasittiin bartoota isaaf deebisan deebise.
So we saw that verse 29
lakkoofsa 29
to verse 31 is the answer that Christ gives in relation to the end of the world. So we've said we will not focus in this history. We will not focus in this history. We'll focus in this history, the end of the world. So what we've then done, we've gone to other gospels that gives us an equivalent of verse 29 to verse 31. So when we are standing in the book of Matthew chapter 24, we've divided it into sections. 29a is giving us the signs of the sun, the moon, and the stars. So the equivalent in Mark is verse 24. It gives us the sun and the moon, but it doesn't give us the stars. When we come to the book of Luke chapter 21, it gives us the sun, the moon, and the stars, but adds some new information, which is the destruction of nations. So when we come to the book of Revelation chapter 6, it's giving us the sun and the moon, but adds new information, that is the earthquake. So now we divided the next section, which is 29b. The sign that is giving us is that the powers of heaven shall be shaken. So in Mark, it combines the stars with the powers of heaven being shaken. In Luke, it compares men's heart failing with the powers of heaven being shaken. In Revelation, we have the stars and the powers of heaven being shaken. So we divided to another section was 30a. We have the sign that the Son of Man is coming. So So that is not available in Mark.
Inni kun Maarqos keessa hin jiru.
That is not available in Luke.
Luqaas keessas hin jiru.
That is not available in Revelation.
Mul'ata keessas hin jiru.
And then finally we had the second advent of Christ.
Xumurarratti lakkoofsa 30 ba'ansaa dhufaatii Kiristoosii.
That is available in Mark.
Inni Maarqos keessas jira.
That is available in Luke.
Luqaas keessas jira.
And we are going to look at it in Revelation. I'll get a verse. It's available in Revelation.
Mul'ata keessas jira garuu booda ilaalla.
So what then we are coming back to do
Maal waliin deebina?
is taking these symbols that we have been given,
Mallattoowwan nuuf kennaman kan ilaalle.
and then now we'll form a line out of it.
Isaan kanarraa toora.
The events that are given here, we are going to form a structure.
Isaan kanarraa caasaa wayii ijaarran.
But before that, Dr. Kedid, I know you are tired.
No, I'm not tired.
No, I can hear from the translation. So if you go to verse 29, verse 31, we are finishing.
Lakkoofsa 29
Matthew chapter 24, we go to verse 31 now.
Maatiyus 24 lakkoofsa 31 deemnama.
Now, what is the relation between verse 30
Walitti dhufeenyi lakkoofsa 30
that we have dissected and verse 31?
lakkoofsa 30.
So verse 31 says, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So which event is that?
Inni ergamoota isaa waaqarraa sagalee malakataa guddaa wajjiniin ergaa isaan immoo warra waaqayyoof waaman qixaarfanii andaara bantii waaqa gar tokko hamma gara isa kaaniittis walitti qabu jedhe. Taatee maalitti kuni?
So which event is that?
Taatee maalitti kuni?
The second coming.
Taatee dhufaatii
So what is the difference in the second coming of verse 31
taatee dhufaatii lammaffaa lakkoofsa 31 irra jiruu fi
and the second coming in verse 30b? Remember 30b, we have the second advent.
dhufaatii lammaffaa isa lakkoofsa 30 irra jiru gidduu garaagarummaa maaliitu jira?
What is the difference between those two signs?
Mallattoowwan kana lamaan gidduu garaagarummaa maaliitu jira?
Ergamoonni godina Aroonii walitti qabuudhaas keessatti
lakkoofsa 31.
Mhm.
Inni sun
muuziqaa kan Ingiliffaan
okay. The next verse 31 says, angels will gather from the four corners of the earth.
Yeah, which is the second coming.
Yeah.
So what is the difference? The question is, what is the difference between the second coming of verse 31 and the second coming of 30b? We remember this second advent.
Lamaan isaanii waa'ee dhufaatii lammaffaadha. Garuu maalidha garaagarummaan lakkoofsa 30 irra jiruu fi lakkoofsa 31 irra jiru.
Okay, now let me recap. Let me take us back. What were the two questions in relation to the end of the world?
Gaaffii lamaanii.
We remember we had two questions in relation to the destruction of the temple.
Diigamuu qulqullummaa wajjin wal qabatee gaaffii lama qabna turre.
Two questions in relation to the end of the world.
Gaaffii lama immoo xumura addunyaa.
One of the questions in relation to the end of the world
Gaaffiin inni tokko
was tell us the sign of thy coming.
milikkita dhufaatii keetii nutti beekan jedhu.
The second question is tell us the sign of the end of the world.
Milikkita xumura addunyaa nutti beekan jedhu inni lama.
Now, and I want to say without proving,
Tu sana mirkaneessini.
30b is speaking to the first question in relation to the Son of Man.
Inni 30 kuni gaaffii isa tokkoffaa wajjin wal qabateeti.
And 31 is speaking to the next question, the sign that the world has come to an end.
Gaaffiin lakkoofsa 31 irra ni jiru immoo gaaffii isa lammaffaadha.
So if you are in verse 30b, what Christ is saying, when you see this sign, then you will know that Christ is coming.
Maal jedhaa jira lakkoofsa 30 inni jiru kuni mallattoowwan kana gaafa argitanii Kiristoos akka inni dhufaa jiru.
So if you see the sign in 30b, know that Christ is going to come.
Yeroo milikkita kana argitanii Kiristoos akka inni dhufaa jiru beektu.
But if you come to verse 31,
Gara 31 gaafa dhuftan garuu
I'm saying that is a different sign.
milikkita kan addaadha yookaan kan biraadha.
When you see verse 31,
Lakkoofsa 31 gaafa laaltan
you just know that Christ has come.
Kiristoos dhufeera jechuudha.
So those signs are different in their nature.
Milikkitoonni kuni adda adda.
One of it is telling you Christ is going to come.
Inni tokko Kiristoos dhufaa jira kan jedhu.
Verse 30 is telling you when you see that Christ has come.
Yeroo milikkitoota kan argitanii Kiristoos dhufaa jira kan jedhu yeroo ta'u inni soddomii tokko immoo Kiristoos dhufeera kan jedhudha jechuudha.
So we'll end there. We will end there.
Asirratti xumurra.
And then when we come next, we'll now build a structure out of this.
Yeroo deebinu isa kanarraa caasaa ijaaran.
Right? So we pray.
Gooftaa Waaqaaf lafaa addumatti si galateeffannaa. Dhoksaa mootummaa keetii gadi fageenyaan akka hubannuuf waan nu gargaarte. Amma yoonaatti nu wajjin ta'uu kee nutti agarsiifteetta. Waan beekuu qabnu beekuu dandeenyeerra. Rakkoon tokko illee nu dandeenye si galateeffanna. Ammoo si kadhannaa. Ammas wanti nuyi hin beeknu waan baay'eetu jira. Isaan hafanis beekuu akka dandeenyuuf nu gargaara. Beekuu duwwaatu hin taane beeknee immoo dhufaatii keetiif ofiis qophaa'u namoota kan biroofis qopheessuu akka dandeenyuuf ati nu gargaara. Maqaa Gooftaa Yesuusiin.